All right. Good morning, everybody from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dobry večer. Good evening to Ukraine. I'm truly delighted to welcome you to a very exclusive event at the Harvard University Asia Center. My name is Yaena Kwon. I'm a broadcast journalist from Germany and currently a visiting fellow at Harvard University. The director of the Asia Center, Professor James Robson, unfortunately can't be with us today as he is sitting in a plane to Israel right now, but he also warmly welcomes our very special guest today, the Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, and it is my honor to host today's conversation. But first things first, to our dear audience, please be aware that this session is being recorded and that we may publish this video on the Harvard Asia Center platforms afterwards. And we trust that no one is recording or distributing the video without prior authorization. All right, before I hand over the mic to our keynote speaker, let me share a few words on today's topic, Asia's significant role in Russia's war on Ukraine. Most of you attended last week's conference where we talked about the broad impacts of the war in Europe on Asian states, about Asia's deep division in its response to the war, and the complex dynamics between the crisis in Europe and military tensions in Asia. So we're extremely lucky and grateful to have Minister Kuleba here virtually and to listen to the Ukrainian perspective. Minister Kuleba was born in 1981 in the northeast of Ukraine in a town called Sumy. He studied international law at Taras Shevchenko University in Kyiv and graduated with honor in 2003. He then obtained his PhD in law just 3 years later. He is the author of the book called The War for Reality, and he held many diplomacy positions before he became Minister of Foreign Affairs in March 2020. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for this kind introduction. Dear friends, I sincerely appreciate the invitation that came from the Harvard University Asia Center. And I thank you for situating Russia's aggression against Ukraine in an Asian context. A crisis of this magnitude has numerous dimensions and sides, obviously, and Asia's take on it warrants a separate, deep discussion. We live in a world that is undergoing rapid change. It did not begin with Putin's insanity in Ukraine, and it will not end there, or rather here. This change comes from various corners simultaneously. For example, the EU has been reinventing itself in the foreign and security spheres over the last decade, particularly in the last year. When it comes to providing nations, this is the, I don't know if you can hear it, but this is the air raid siren in Kiev. So we will try to do as much as we can, but when my security walks in and tells me that I have to go to the shelter, I will have to leave you. But it's not my fault, blame the Russians. So when it comes to providing nations with a true sense of security and protection, NATO has become one of the world's so-called most valuable players. Ukraine, I dare to say this, has become a true legend in international affairs in the last 14 or so months. A nation of freedom-loving people who stand firm. While Ukrainian soldiers make history on the front lines, the rest of the world is doing the right thing historically and morally by supporting them. With these seismic shifts in international relations, Asia is at the epicenter of this global transformation. This is not unusual. For decades, the region was a global change agent. First, by achieving true independence, defeating imperialism, and finding its own voice, and then by making incredible economic strides and lifting millions out of poverty. What I hear from Asian colleagues more often than I wish I did are two words: solidarity and neutrality. There is no problem with solidarity. They do express solidarity with Ukraine, and I appreciate it, but they do it while declaring neutrality towards us and Russia. The problem is that there is no place for neutrality in situations of aggression, murder, terrorist attacks, rape, looting, and mass atrocities. However, some nations in the region still prefer to take a neutral stance in this war. Some people, not just in Asia, but all over the world, even support Russia, as shown by polls and social media, partly because they despise America and are unwilling to leave their twisted reality in which America and the West is always the bad guy and Russia is always defending itself. Those who are truly confused or hypocritical, fooled or willing to be fooled, this is the type of audience President Putin and Minister Lavrov are attempting to reach around the world by presenting themselves as victims and embracing the same rhetoric as Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein before them. It appears to be the unavoidable pattern of every failing dictator, imposing their imperialism by force in their region. They play an anti-imperialist card just before their demise in the rest of the world. Nonetheless, Russian war criminals should take off their masks, and that's what we're doing. We're helping them to do that. One cannot claim to be anti-imperialist while acting imperialistic, such as attacking a neighbor, denying him the right to exist, attempting to annex his land, or bombing entire cities into the dust, as Russia did not only in Ukraine, but in Syria and Chechnya too. Russia's war on Ukraine is bad news for everyone. It primarily affects Ukraine, but it also disrupts lives, economies, and hopes all over the world. That is why Russia must be stopped. This war has many faces. It is the world's largest country attacking its smaller neighbor. It is a former empire attempting to drag a former colony back into its shadow. It is a dictatorship attempting to impose its will on another democratic, sovereign nation that simply wants to live freely. I believe it is past time to recognize how pervasive and destructive anti-Western sentiment has become in many parts of the world, including Asia. Let's be honest, this sentiment is sometimes rooted in the traumatic experiences that Asian, African, and Latin American countries have had with the West. But for the most part, they are out of date, especially in comparison to modern Russia. Look at Russia today. Shameless, ruthless, fascist to the core. The West wishes to cast off the shadow of imperialism. Putin's Russia, on the other hand, is a proud imperialist. Just listen to the propaganda junk they feed Russians on a daily basis about the greatness of Russia. Whether the new imperialism succeeds or fails, the consequences will be felt around the world. Just yesterday, Russia seemed on the rise. Now, because of the heroism of Ukrainian soldiers, its future is more than uncertain. When the full-fledged war began, almost no one gave Ukraine a chance, and I will remember those conversations for the rest of my life. The conversations that left me only one option: to face the defeat of my country and to probably spend the rest of my life in exile. But we as a nation said no to the best experts and analysts who forecasted this destiny for us. We began to fight. And more than a year later, the tables have turned. Because Ukrainians had the courage, because the world had decency to help Ukrainians, and because Russia turned out to be a Potemkin empire in many ways: corrupt, self-aggrandizing, overconfident, buoyant on the outside, but dead on the inside. It contributes nothing to the world from an ideological standpoint, nothing but hatred for the West in general and the United States in particular. Hatred is what Russia sells all over the world. Unfortunately for some, it is sufficient for the time being, but in the long run, this hate machine is bound to run out of gas and also oil. Dear friends, for many years we believed that humanity was creating a world that was not divided into the global south and the global north. I continue to believe that this division is artificial. We are bound together by the universal values outlined in the UN Charter. There is still time to bridge this gap, but due to Russia's reckless behavior, it will take much more effort to get there. Today, it appears that zero-sum thinking is making a comeback. We see the new imperialism not only knocking on our door, but also kicking it open. It happened because we had a blind spot the size of Russia for decades. Fortunately, we no longer do. Fortunately, Russia is losing the war, not only on Ukraine, but also on modernity, sanity, and common sense. But it hasn't lost yet. More effort has to be made. What is clear is that, like all other wars, this war will also end. Ukraine will prevail, and it will take generations for Russia to climb out of the rabbit hole it dug for itself. And one of the main lessons will be that aggression leads nowhere. Neither the Western concept of rule-based world nor the Eastern concept of a community of common destiny can be based on the right of the larger and stronger nations to carve up the smaller and weaker ones. Not just because the UN Charter says no, but because it is in everyone's best interest. This war includes the worst aspects of the 20th century's darkest years: land grabs, genocidal acts, and shameless propaganda. In some ways, it is the 1930s all over again, except this time the world didn't fall apart under the pressure of a dictatorship, but rather pulled together. As a Ukrainian, I am proud of my country's role in this trying time, which says a lot about who we are as people, communities, and humanity. Many nations of the world did, in fact, act as a community of common destiny during this war. And one of the reasons David can defeat Goliath is that so many nations and people support him. But if we had more Asian support, it would be much easier. But it will still happen, the victory of Ukraine. And when this happens, when Goliath is defeated, there will be a big celebration, a big mourning of the fallen, and a big need to come together and re-examine how we live, how we treat one another, how we see each other, how we say or don't say the truths to each other. It is still possible to avert the age of the clash of civilizations. The idea of the world's countries having each other's backs is still feasible. If we can defend freedom by banding together, why can't we do the same for other issues like climate change, the food crisis, and global disparity? At least we should try. And that's what we're doing now in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Kuleba, for sharing your thoughts and especially for taking time to have this really important conversation with us on day 436 of the invasion. Let me first congratulate you on the really powerful and concise statements that you just made. Actually, there would be so much to talk about, but let me narrow it down to a few questions before I'll open up the Q&A to our audience. So either raise your hands or write down your short question in the Q&A box. All right, Minister Kuleba, let me start off with the big elephant in the room, China. There have been lots of hopes and there have been lots of disappointments about China. And I have to ask, what can you tell us about this first ever phone call between President Xi and President Zelensky last week, 14 months after Russia's invasion? And on a more broader level, what is your general take on China's potential role as a peacemaker? Do you know anything more about China's 12-point peace plan that President Xi brought to Moscow when he visited his dear friend Putin in March? And would Ukraine have found it acceptable?
Indeed, it was the first conversation in the 14 months since the beginning of the large-scale invasion. It wouldn't be unfair to say that we did not speak with China throughout these months. We did, and I communicated with both the former and the current foreign ministers of China. But it's regrettable that the conversation between leaders took place only now. But the good news is that it did take place. And it is important to talk with China. It is important to make China better understand our perspective of the war. And I think the best deliverable of this conversation as of now, in addition to the fact of the conversation, is that President Xi clearly reiterated respect for Ukraine's territorial integrity in that conversation. We are looking forward to receiving a special envoy of the government of China and to continue our conversation with him. Our goal is simple, is to ensure that China understands and realizes that point in its foreign policy. And that point is very simple, that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is against the interest of all countries of the world who believe that respect for territorial integrity matters, irrespective of geography and political context. China should not be helping Russia. China should help to restore just and lasting peace instead, as a big global player, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. China enjoys a special relationship with Russia, and therefore we believe it has leverage to persuade Russia or to discourage Russia from certain moves. So it was important. It was an important call. It's good that they spoke. We are making, I would say, we're preparing for a very in-depth conversation with the representative of the Chinese government. And, there is a saying that the big journey begins with the first step. So that conversation between two presidents was exactly the first step of what is hopefully to be a big journey with a good outcome for Ukraine and for the rest of the world, which would be the full withdrawal of Russia from Ukraine, restoration of respect of our territorial integrity, and many, many other elements related to the settlement of the conflict.
Thank you, Minister. Let me ask you about military support. Last week, I had the chance to ask a question to the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who came to Harvard University at the end of his 6-day state visit to the US. I asked him about lethal aid, and President Yoon emphasized that his government is considering, quote, various options. So can you share with us your perspective on what kind of talks have taken place so far, and how significant is exactly military support from Asia at this current stage in the war, where your military is preparing a bigger counteroffensive?
It's a very simple conversation. It starts with a basic point. Some countries in Asia have everything that Ukraine needs to defend itself and to defend UN Charter, and to gain victory that these countries will also benefit from in a strategic perspective. Unfortunately, these countries are either not opening up their stocks for us, or they're considering various options, or they're doing far less than they could without inflicting any damage on their own national security interests. And in that sense, I am disappointed with the way Asian countries handle the issue of military assistance. They vote for UN General Assembly resolutions calling spade a spade, condemning Russian aggression. We appreciate it. It's not always easy with some of them. You have to work to ensure their votes. They express solidarity with Ukraine. Informally, they tell us that they stand by us and they want us to win and they want the war to end as soon as possible, because most of them themselves gained independence and defended their independence in a fight with foreign aggressors. So they understand all of that. They solidarize, if there's such word, solidarize, but they do not open up the stocks. And it's the same as if a robber breaks into your house, all of a sudden realizes that you're going to defend your life and your house and your property against him. He tries to kill you and rob you, and someone is standing, and your neighbor is standing outside watching you, and encourages you to condemns the trespasser, encourages you to defeat him and kick him out of your house, expresses condolences on the broken leg or broken vase in the house, but is not even throwing you a stick to help you in this fight. This is how it looks. Of course, I understand that the more victorious Ukraine will be on the battlefield, the more constructive some countries will get. But the most appreciated aid is the one that comes first. And I wouldn't say that Asian countries are on the top list.
Japan's Prime Minister Kishida made a surprise visit to Ukraine in March, just actually one day after President Xi's visit to Moscow. Are there any talks about other state visits from Asian head of states to Ukraine, for example, South Korea?
Yeah, we are working on a number of visits, of course, but this is diplomacy, so we do not disclose things. In the pre-war diplomacy, you usually wouldn't disclose things until the pre-visit announcement. I mean, some days before the visit begins, and you make the official announcement. But now that we are fighting a war, we often announce visits after our guests actually leave the country for security reasons. Well, like we did recently, just today, with the visit of my good friend and colleague, Foreign Minister of Bahrain. He spent 2 nights in Kiev, basically 2 full days, and but it became public only after he left. So we're working on the visits. We're also working on the visits of Ukrainian senior officials to Ukraine. We would be happy to see President of South Korea here. We would be happy to see him in Seoul hosting, for example, Ukrainian Prime Minister. We are working on all of that. But I think that Asian countries are unfairly overly cautious. I would put it this way.
All right. Minister Kuleba, I know we're getting close to the time when we have to end our session due to your busy schedule, obviously. But I hope to get in a few questions from the audience. So please shortly introduce yourself, and keep your questions short, please. I see one hand raising by Janan Irambumi. Maybe, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, first I wanted to express my gratitude to the Foreign Minister for taking the time, despite such a busy schedule and historic times, to speak to us. I'm a student here at Harvard and had the chance to listen to President Zelensky when he spoke to us a few months ago. And since then, I think when talking about Russia, China, another country that very naturally comes in mind is Iran. And my question to you is how you see Ukraine-Iran relations unfolding, and specifically with the shooting down of the Ukrainian passenger plane on the Iranian air, and many of its victims being Persians. How do you see the relationship unfolding, specifically also considering the very historic Women Life Liberty movement in which they are also fighting for their own liberation?
Ukrainian-Iranian relations are not unfolding. After Iranian drones were sent to Russia, and after these drones hit various targets in Ukraine, that was the turning point. Ever since then, it was last autumn. Ever since then, we registered more and more drones, which Iran claims they're not sending to Russia, but somehow they continue to target civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Russia continues to target civilian infrastructure in Ukraine using drones, which are a full copy of Iranian drone. So maybe if it looks like Ukrainian drone, if it flies like Ukrainian drone, perhaps it is an Iranian drone, right? And ever since then, we don't have a relationship. We told them that what they're doing is unacceptable. We don't have a real leverage to stop them from doing that, but we are trying to build a coalition which would discourage Iran from continuing military support of Russia. And we witnessed the protests, and Ukraine is a country that went through at least 3 revolutions in the 30 years of its civil. I would say it's a civil protest. That we call revolutions in defense of the democratic choice. And one of the presidents of Ukraine, who was pro-Russian, he fled Ukraine as very corrupt. He fled Ukraine in 2014, after the latest revolution of dignity. So we respect the right of the people to protest against the government, because it's part of our political culture. And that's what we do when we are when we're deeply unhappy with the policies of our own governments.
All right, I will read out maybe 2 questions from the QA box, and you can put them together. Chengdong Liang writes, some might say Asian don't engage enough is because they don't see their skin in the game. Likewise, if a war happens in the Indo-Pacific, the Europeans may not engage either. Any thoughts on that? And a second really good question is on the role on India. What role is or can India play in supporting Ukraine's sovereignty? What, if any, conversations are planned between India and Ukraine in the near future? So maybe Minister Kuleba, you might share your thoughts on that.
Well, theoretically, yes, one might think I don't have a bone in the fight. This is not my war. I'm far away from it. And probably this is what people in Asia also thought until food prices started going up rapidly. And the reason it happened was because Russia blocked Ukrainian ports. And we could not export our grain, sunflower oil, and other agricultural products to the global market. And when our friends in Asia realized that there is a direct dependence between the war in Ukraine and the food prices in their countries, yes, we observed a spike in the interest from some Asian colleagues to play a mediation role or to somehow help unlock Ukrainian ports. So this is the problem. This is not a European war. It has direct repercussions globally, including Asia. India, you asked about India. It's the same, but kind of works differently for Asia, for India, because when India started contracting Russian oil in very big volumes at a very low price, the only reason why it gained this unique opportunity to ensure, to strengthen its energy security at no money is because someone in Ukraine is dying, because there is a war. Because Russia attacked Ukraine, European Union imposed sanctions on Russia, including on oil and gas. Russia went to the rest of the world trying to sell its oil at great discount. India started buying this oil. So when someone tells you, well, this is we don't feel, as you rightly mentioned, skin in this game. We don't have a skin in this game. This is just diplomatic hypocrisy that speaks for the good professionalism of the colleagues who resort to it. The war of Russia against Ukraine is taking place in Europe, but it has global repercussions. Some suffer from it, some benefit from it. This is life. But I think the question is, and in particular about India, is that if you benefit from it, then perhaps it should be reflected in your policy. The understanding that you benefit because Ukraine suffers should be reflected in your foreign policies. We respect, I respect all of my colleagues all over the world, irrespective of their positions, except Russia, of course, and Belarus. But I want them to be honest. And if they accuse Europeans of taking care only of their wars, as some of my Asian colleagues do, then stop benefiting from the war in Europe. If you want to be honest and bold, then take it to be 100% honest and bold in your considerations. Thank you. I have to run, but I really appreciated the conversation. Regards to all of you. Stay safe. And hopefully one day we will see each other in person.
Yes, thank you so much, Minister Kuleba. I really want to thank our dear co-sponsors as well. Thank you, the Harvard Asia Center family. Thank you, Tenzin. And most of all, thank you, Minister Kuleba, for making this happen. The fact that you took time for us while your country is at war is truly incredible. We're mostly appreciative and really hope that we will have the chance to meet in person one day. And I really hope that this conversation might have contributed a little bit today to inspiring people around the world, especially Asia, to keep supporting Ukraine, because may this horrible war end as soon as possible. Thank you, Minister Kuleba. Дякую.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.